Hey there, Colts fans. Thanks for tuning in for your regularly scheduled edition midweek of the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. I'm Nathan Brown, Colts insider for the Indianapolis Star, joined by my Colts insider co-worker, Joel A. Erickson. A lot to talk about on today's episode. We got a chance to roam the Colts locker room today, talk with members of the team on both sides of the ball, offense and defense, receivers, Alec Pierce, who knows Sauce Gardner well from their time at the University of Cincinnati, folks who spoke with A.D. Mitchell before he left the facility yesterday, having learned that he had been part of the Colts-Jets blockbuster trade, as well as members of the defense who were quite enthused at the addition of a two-time first-team All-Pro corner and what that could mean for the Colts' future moving forward, as well as, of course, head coach Shane Steichen, who had a lot of praise to heap on Chris Ballard and the front office being able to complete that trade. And then we'll also get into the Colts matchup this weekend against the Atlanta Falcons in Berlin that Joel will be on the ground for. So lots to get into. We'll start, of course, with the blockbuster trade of yesterday that we broke down a little bit in last night's podcast that hopefully you guys have already listened to. If you haven't, I encourage you to go and do so. Sauce Gardner, two-time All-Pro corner, that the Colts have added. Shane Steichen heaped a lot of praise on Chris Ballard for being able to complete a major deal like this, one that really wasn't expected and surprised lots of folks, including you and I. What was your initial reaction when we got a chance to hear from Shane at the podium here on Wednesday morning?
Yeah, just, Steichen really feels like they're getting a star. That's the I that because what they gave up for it, but just kind of hearing him talk about, what he does, how much he helps the defense. That really is what was driven home to me. Is just that he really thinks they're getting a big time player.
I also really feel like another part that stood out to me was when he spoke a little bit about the way in which new defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo can use a multifaceted talent like Sauce Gardner in secondary, and the way in which this gives that defense just even more flexibility in the schemes it can put together, in the ways it can attack teams, in the ways the strengths of several guys in the secondary really kind of fit well. You and I have talked, and I think we maybe even touched on it in last night's podcast, about how eventually when the Colts secondary gets fully healthy, when you have Sauce Gardner, who still is yet to formally clear concussion protocol, but the Colts expect him to be on the field this weekend in Berlin, as well as Travarius Ward, who is still on IR and could return as soon as week 12 from from suffering his second concussion of the year. Once those two guys get on the field together, healed up, fully ready, it gives them a lot of optionality with the potential of putting Jalen Jones up against some tight ends against teams that have very talented players at that position on the field, as well as the ability to use Mekhi Blackmon in a little bit different ways. This team just all of a sudden goes from having, I wouldn't say a questionable secondary, but just not one that you really think a whole lot of when you're starting Jonathan Edwards and Mekhi Blackmon, to the potential of having Ward and Gardner opposite each other. Just kind of takes this defense as a whole, frankly, to new heights when you think of the impact that it can have on the front seven as well as the rushing the quarterback in the passing game.
Yeah, I don't think they were like great necessarily in Pittsburgh, but if you go back and watch that game and just kind of look at the stats they put up, they did a good job of kind of holding the Steelers in check a little bit, even though they're facing a bunch of short fields, and they didn't have either of those guys. They just had Jalen Jones back. Mm-hmm. And I like Jalen Jones. I think there's a role for him, like we talked about in the previous podcast, in this defense. But there's a couple different ways that I'm gonna, if we're trying to figure out like what they're gonna do. I mean, obviously no one's gonna tell us, exactly what schematically he changes. But I think one of the things that's obvious is that they might be able to blitz more. I think the Colts are 22nd right now in blitz rate, and the way Next Gen Stats defines a blitz is sending 5 or more rushers Now, the Colts do. I think what the Colts have done a lot of this year is more zone or simulated pressure. A simulated pressure just means it's 4 or less coming, but you don't know where they're coming from. Some of them are coming from depth. Some guys are dropping out. That kind of thing. You do a little bit of the simulated pressure stuff. You feel more comfortable doing the 5, send 6 type of thing if you have guys who can play cover 0, who can play man or cover 1 and man up on guys. And I would think that with once they have Gardner and Ward, I did see Ward coming off of the field with a trainer today. That's a big, I think, milestone just for him. He's on IR. This is his last week. Just for him being eligible to return for that Chiefs game at the end of November. But I think if you have Ward and you have Gardner, Kenny Moore in the slot, you feel better about sending 6 and having to play 0 and expecting those corners to take away that short stuff, that short, quick stuff, and allow the blitz to get home. I think you feel a lot better about it. And maybe we see Lou Anarumo's blitz percentages rise in that case.
Yeah. It was really interesting talking to a lot of players at different positions around the locker room today. Ones that I can think of that stand out. Kenny Moore, Zaire Franklin. You spoke to Jalen Jones and got a really interesting quote from him in a story that's posted on IndyStar.com about how excited he was, despite being a guy who will likely, especially once Ward is back on the field, a guy who's going to see his role shrink. I think that speaks a lot about just the connectedness and the selflessness of this Colts team. But I think just about everyone in that locker room probably in some way could feel like, this team or their role is going to be easier or just impacted in a good way with an addition of a 2-time All-Pro corner like him. The receivers, including Alec Pierce, are really excited to get to go up against him in practice. Pierce, of course, did that for 2 years when he was at Cincinnati, and both of them starred there for years when they shared that team together. A guy like Kenny Moore, who's a veteran of the secondary and been on this team for quite some time and seen a lot at his several years with the Colts. Same with Zaire Franklin. Just, I think, both excited to not necessarily see their roles become a little bit easier, but just see, I think maybe lift some pressure off lots of guys' shoulders, as you were speaking about there. And from talking to Franklin specifically, he mentioned how motivated he was yesterday learning about this, because he feels like now this team could really be on the precipice of something really special. And, there's that much bigger need to just make sure, all your I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and you're all the more prepared and ready for a game like Sundays in Berlin, which shouldn't be overlooked. The Falcons have had an up and down season, but they, pose a lot of really interesting matchups on both sides of the ball. And so this is certainly a game that the Colts don't want to let slip away. And I think you'll see everyone on that team maybe just trying to be a little bit extra prepared, knowing the focus and the attention that a guy like Sauce Gardner is going to be getting, and everything that he's having to go through just to try and make sure that he's on the field come Sunday for his first game in a couple weeks.
Yeah. What I think the most interesting for me was Jones. You kind of alluded to this, but Jalen Jones, Colts fans might not every fan knows this. This is something that we know more than the fans do, but Jalen Jones is not he's not always super into getting into his thoughts or offering something much more beyond platitudes on stuff. He was excited to talk about Sauce Gardner. He was legitimately excited to talk about, he was really excited about, this dude can play, big, long press corner. We can take guys out of the game with him. And Jalen Jones is going to lose snaps because of this. Ultimately, after not this week he'll start, but after the bye, Jones becomes more of a matchup type player if everybody's healthy. While Ward and Gardner are playing on the outside. I think number one, I think that speaks to how selfless Jalen Jones is, but also I think number two, just that's the kind of player that Sauce Gardner is. This is a big time player who, even guys at his own position are like, man, this is a huge thing for our defense.
Mm-hmm. we got a chance to speak with, as I mentioned, Alec Pierce, who spent a couple of years in college with Sauce Gardner. They spent just about every practice, I think, matching up against each other. Alec talked about how simple walkthroughs before games would turn into nearly full-on full speed practices because both those guys were just incredibly competitive and motivated, and one would just make each other better. I know we don't get to see a ton in practice, but will be interesting to see or talk to guys about just maybe how practice is ratcheted up a tiny bit for the receivers now, having to go up against a guy like Sauce. And we talked to Alec, and he told us a little bit about how Gardner is a guy that just is kind of good at everything he does. And he talked about he took up golf just a couple of years ago, and he's shooting in the 80s fairly consistently, and can bowl over 200. Just like little interesting tidbits here and there about this guy's competitiveness and skills on and off the field. It certainly seems like a really interesting guy that we'll hopefully get to know a little bit more. We'll hopefully get a chance to speak with him on Thursday. He's still in concussion protocol, and NFL rules dictate that players that are still going through that process cannot speak to the media. Shane Steichen said that they do expect Gardner to get cleared and then likely be on the field in some capacity. I would imagine a fairly heavy workload as the Colts face the Falcons on Sunday, but we haven't gotten a chance to talk to Sauce himself. And so a lot of today was just about going around the locker room and getting a sense of their reaction around the team, as well as, Shane himself. We'll get a chance to talk to some assistant coaches tomorrow too, and learn a little bit more about how he might impact this defense in particular. Another player that, or maybe on the flip side of this, I got a chance to speak with a couple players in the locker room about the bittersweet aspect of trade deadline day in terms of players getting energized by the addition of someone like Sauce Gardner, and then also at the same time learning shortly after that A.D. Mitchell was part of that deal. In particular, Josh Downs was a little conflicted when I spoke with him, talking about how he was his brother, and they really enjoyed sharing the receiving room together. Same with Alec Pierce. Zaire Franklin was someone who had really tried to have a shoulder that AD could lean on after everything that happened in the Rams game a month and a half or so ago, and ultimately felt like that AD had taken this on the chin and was ultimately fairly positive. And I didn't know a lot about the Jets roster, but you go and look at their depth chart, and he's now their number 2 receiver, only behind Garrett Wilson, who is still coming back from a knee injury. So this immediately is a major opportunity for A.D. Mitchell to hopefully revitalize his career. And I know there are a lot of guys in that locker room that are really going to be rooting hard for him from afar as they see what this next chapter looks like for him.
Yeah, I think the thing about the NFL, it's I think different than other sports, is that trades in the NFL more often than not are but for draft picks. You get guys, you don't give up guys. And so I think when you give up somebody in a trade, I do think it's a little more jarring for players than, in some of the other sports. Because in other sports, in baseball, trades happen all the time. Same thing in the NBA. Players, I feel like, are getting traded a lot as long as their contracts match up in the extremely specific situations that they have to be in to be traded. But I feel like players get traded for players quite a bit. Whereas in the NFL, like I said, it's usually draft picks. One of the other things I was thinking of is just like Grover Stewart's been here for basically all of Chris Ballard's tenure. And I talked to him, and I was like, were you expecting it? And he's like, if I was being honest, no, I wasn't really expecting anything. And he shouldn't. I mean, they've made one deal, and it was because Nyheim Hines wanted out of the 2022 team up until now. And then obviously once the deal comes down, you're happy. Like it's in all sports, if you go out and get a big name at the deadline, like the team is saying to you, we think this team is really, really good. And there's a lot to that. I think one of the other things though is like we've mentioned this before several times. This is really the first time they've had a team like this at this point in the season. They started slow with the 2018 team, with the 2020 team, and so they weren't quite in the same position where they're in the 1 seed looking for something. I think that's a significant part of this too. Is just why Chris Ballard made the move. They're in a different spot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are several players that spoke about. They don't want to necessarily say outright that we're Super Bowl contenders. That is certainly not something that Shane Steichen would admit today. But there's a sense, I think, in that locker room that when you make a move like this, where you're giving up 2 first-round picks over the next couple of years, as well as a promising, even if embattled, receiver like A.D. Mitchell, that guys feel that much more, if they didn't already, that this front office and coaching staff and the franchise at large trust that this is a team that can go the distance. And I'm sure there's been a lot of talk and there's plenty of trust already in that locker room, but I think there's maybe just an extra pep in your step when you realize what this team gave up in terms of its future draft capital to get a player like Sauce Gardner, and the feeling like this could be really the year. The schedule is going to get a lot tougher, starting with the Steelers game. This team, I think, was set to face the 4th toughest schedule through the rest of the season, and they've started that 0-1. So not how you want to kick that off, but they are. I don't think you can argue that they are anything but a better team than they were 36 hours ago, and really interested to see how these matchups start to come together immediately against a really strong team from a skill position standpoint in the Falcons that boast running back Bijan Robinson and standout number 1 wide receiver Drake London.
We can talk a little bit about the Falcons here, because I think when you look at the record, you're like, oh, the Colts should beat the Falcons pretty easily. But I do think it's an interesting matchup. Now, I will say this: when we discuss these matchups, like that Steelers game last week is the kind of thing that makes me queasy. It's why I'm not a gambler, because nothing about that game last week went according to what the stats or really the games or anything that you'd watch said that game was going to go. But if you look at this Falcons team, like I think like Drake London is great at receiver, and then Bijan Robinson is one of the best big play backs in the league. Like he's not Jonathan Taylor. He doesn't have the volume that Jonathan Taylor does, because they give some carries to Tyler Algier. But like this is a guy that can absolutely just take the ball to the house at any time, and he catches the ball a ton. And unlike a lot of running backs, they're not checkdowns. He's averaging something like 11 yards per catch. That's a huge number for a running back who's got, I think, 40 catches this year, something close to 40 catches this year. That's a tough spot for this defense, and I think Gardner helps. Like Shane, we kind of kept peppering Shane with Kenny Play on Sunday. He was saying he's got to learn the terminology, he's got to learn the playbook. We'll see where it goes from there. But we kind of pinned him down at one point on it, and he said that's the plan in terms of him playing. I don't think that the plan has to be that complicated. You just say, hey, Sauce, you guard Drake London, and for the most part, and we'll have other people help. Zaire Franklin was also saying, like, the other thing about getting Gardner ready for this game is that you've got Cam Bynum, you've got Kenny Moore, you've got Zaire Franklin, you've got guys on the field who can remind Gardner if he's not sure of what's going on. So you've got veterans around him who can help him out with that stuff. But yeah, London, and especially Bijan Robinson, because Robinson can turn the game on a dime a little bit. The Falcons offense is like dead middle in the NFL in like every category. They're like 15th or 16th. But they have these guys who can really make them explosive in certain categories.
That's a really good point. I think you make a great point there about the fact that Sauce doesn't have to necessarily be, a veteran leader on this team right away. They've got several of those, guys like Kenny Moore and Zaire Franklin alone have been, part of this team, part of this either front seven or secondary for 7 or 8 years now. And Gardner really just needs to be a playmaker who trusts in his skills and trusts in what's got him here, what won him those 2 All-Pros and those 2 Pro Bowl honors and the Defensive Rookie of the Year award he won in 2022. He just has to go out there and make plays. He doesn't have to be someone who's also leading this defense, which is, I imagine, more of a role that he played the last couple of years at a Jets defense where he was the cornerstone and had been the star and was recently made the highest paid corner in the league just this summer when he inked his new 4-year deal with the Jets that now keeps him under contract at the Colts through 2030.
Even at corner, yeah. He doesn't have to carry the load the same way.
Yes,
he does this week, if playing wise, but he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to. Once Charvarius Ward comes back, because Ward was playing that number 1 role and playing it well. I'll be curious to see what Lou Anarumo does if he just kind of treats it like if he goes by matchups, if he goes by sides, how he handles that. But Gardner doesn't have to carry the entire load the way he did in New York either. I'm having trouble, by the way. This is like a weird memory thing that's going on. But every time we say Gardner, I think Minshew.
Yeah.
It's just this has not happened to me at all since they got him. I think because you think of him as Sauce in your head, but we're saying Gardner. And every time I'm like, why are we talking about Gardner? No, we're not talking about Gardner Minshew. I got some scars from the Gardner Minshew days.
I didn't even cover Gardner Minshew, and I was almost, catching myself writing that in the story, the half dozen stories that, I've both written over the last 24, 30 hours or so since this trade broke. I think the schedule also really plays into the Colts' hands really, really well. You get, again, this is not, by no means is this an easy matchup for the Colts defense going on, not just on the road, but, on an intercontinental flight with the time changes. They're a team that is going somewhat late in the process. Different teams take different approaches to these international games. Some get over there fairly early and spend the whole week there. Some kind of fly in last minute. The Colts, I wouldn't say maybe they're going last minute. They're still arriving to be able to conduct what they hope to be somewhat of a normal Friday in terms of media and practice before, they then get into Saturday and game day on Sunday. But the Colts get a chance with Sauce, trying to get used to Lou Anarumo's defense to not have a dry run, but just kind of an initial stab at it, as well as they both can get ready and prepared for this and learn each other. And then they get a bye week coming up here before they then have, I think what you would say arguably is the biggest game of the season that looms right now in that road test at the Kansas City Chiefs coming up on November 23rd. This is, as some players in the locker room joked, Sauce gets a pair of bye weeks this year because
he gets two.
And the Jets bye week that he just finished up came after missing a game, admittedly with a concussion. So that's not necessarily what you want. But so he will have missed game. He will have not played games in week 8, week 9, or week 11. So as long as he's, not feeling any ill effects from that concussion, will come back fairly fresh, along with ample time with that bye week to try and get up to speed with Lou Anarumo's defense. And then assuming that Charvarius Ward is back on the field, and I don't know that that's necessarily a guarantee. He's had 2 concussions this year. He's in IR, going through the concussion protocol. As you mentioned, he was back on the field today in some respect, which is a good thing to see. But the first game that he could come back from IR is that Chiefs game. So I don't know that it's a guarantee that they would be back. I'm sure that's something that the Colts would certainly want in a best case scenario, but really probably about as good as you could hope to lay out things for Sauce from a schedule perspective, except for the fact that he's going from literally being in the New York City area, 30 hours ago, flying to Indianapolis, getting up to speed for a couple practices here, and then having to make sure he traveled with his passport when he flew here last night. to be able to hop on a plane and go to Berlin.
He also gets the rare distinction of playing in 3 separate countries in the same NFL season.
It's true.
Because the Jets played the Broncos in London on October 12th. So he's getting his frequent flyer miles in this year. Yeah, I do think the other thing is after this game against the Falcons, it gives you a runway to kind of build him up. Like he probably I wonder if he'll get the normal like fully off for the bye week. I think the coaches get some of that off too. I think he'll probably end up doing some work though to get caught up on the defense. You know, maybe the other players won't have to do so. That helps as well as to get ready for the Chiefs. Because as much as I say it's somewhat simple for him to get started in the defense, it's obviously not entirely simple. Lou Anarumo is a game plan defensive coordinator, like a true game plan defensive coordinator where he doesn't have like a set system. So there's a lot to learn from that standpoint. The schedule does help them in terms of that, just for where the deadline fell. It's still, I think, pretty jarring to go trade, practice, flight. Like I think the Colts get on a plane. We're taping this on Wednesday. The Colts get on a plane at like 8 p.m. tomorrow or something like that and fly to Germany. So it like basically his week has been get traded on Tuesday, probably immediately get on a flight or close to immediately get on a flight, come to Indianapolis, negotiate with Josh Downs for his jersey, meet as many people as he can, try to learn the defense, go to practice, keep trying to learn the defense, go to bed, wake up, learn the game plan, practice, eat, get on a plane, try to fall asleep. Yeah. And then once they get to Germany, they're in game mode. Mm-hmm. So that's the way that the Colts kind of handle these international trips. So just it's a pretty whirlwind thing, but I also think that the guys, like NFL players, are a little more used to this than we realize they are. Maybe not Sauce Gardner because he's been the face of a franchise, but a lot of guys get signed, like they do a tryout and then they get signed or they get waived and they get picked up by another team, and the next thing you know, they know they're starting. Lou Anarumo was telling us his first year in the league, they had to start a corner in week 14 who he didn't meet until the 6th period of Wednesday's practice because of a flight issue. And that guy's played 65 snaps that game. So it's just kind of something that kind of has to happen in the NFL. The Germany piece of it is something that it's a little bit different. I don't know that that happens all the time, but the Colts also didn't trade for Sauce Gardner to be like, yeah, we'll just give you 2 weeks. Especially, I think this Falcons game, well, it's not like huge in the standings. Like if you lose 2 straight and you go to 7-3, I don't think it's like awful. I think just for the vibes of it all, getting a win here is a big deal, because if you win this game, you get to have a nice like celebratory flight back. It's a long flight back from Berlin because they're not connecting through 2 different airports like I am. So it's a really long flight back. If you're celebrating, I think that flight's easy. If you're not celebrating, I think that's a really, really awful flight and you're really upset, especially if it's 2 losses in a row. Mm-hmm. And then you go into the bye week and you have to sit with it. So I think this game, just from a vibe standpoint, is kind of a big deal, just for this Colts team feeling like, hey, we're still the team we thought we were 2 weeks ago, which that makes it, that puts some stakes on a Europe game. Usually these games in Europe are kind of herky-jerky and teams don't look like themselves. The Colts kind of need to play the way they're capable of.
You're totally spot on that. Another maybe short tangent here. I was thinking earlier today about just the timing of this trade. We know that this Colts schedule is getting increasingly more difficult over the second half of the year. But when you think about landing a cornerback like Sauce Gardner, and then start to look at some of the top wide receiver options that the Colts are going to play, this really couldn't come at a better time. We talked about Drake London already of the Atlanta Falcons. You've got Rashee Rice coming up for the Kansas City Chiefs. You've got Nico Collins with the Houston Texans. You now got Jacoby Myers, who just recently joined the Jacksonville Jaguars at the trade deadline. You have Jackson Smith and Jigba, who I think is leading the league in receiving yards with the Seattle Seahawks. And then you, of course, play the Jaguars and the Texans again before the season finishes up. So, like, I mean, this group that this team is playing from a receiver standpoint, when you think of the type of impact that a guy like Sauce Gardner can have, especially if he's got Ward, playing alongside him on the other corner, I think that's a really, like, we have debated back and forth over the last couple podcasts about should the Colts add an edge rusher, should they target a cornerback in the trade deadline, and really specifically when you look at the players at the wide receiver position that this team is going to face just to get through the end of this regular season, not to think about who they might face in the playoffs when the postseason rolls around in January. I mean, they have some major tests at that level. And I admit I was someone who I felt like was thinking edge rusher coming into these final couple of days of the trade deadline, but you, I think, made a really good point last night that when you really took a step back and thought about the edge rushers who ultimately were on the chopping block, who were acquired. Now, maybe if someone made some home run play at someone like, Jermaine Johnson or someone else, maybe they could have been made available, but I still don't even know that someone like Johnson has nearly the impact that someone like Sauce Gardner does. And particularly when you look at some of the strengths from a depth chart standpoint at some of the teams that the Colts are facing here over the next month and a half, it's hard to argue that a cornerback is the weapon that they probably needed most as they try to, continue piling up these wins and attempt to hold on to that top spot in the AFC.
Yeah. I think the other thing that we're writing, and it'll be posted by the time most of you listen to this because it'll be posted in the morning, is just, everyone kind of pointed this out right away. This is a bet on Daniel Jones. This Falcons game for Daniel Jones is going to be interesting too, because if you look at the Falcons, it's a really good pass defense. Mm-hmm. It's an exceptional pass defense. They've given up more than 200 total passing yards just once all season. Last week against the Patriots, and it was like 209 or something like that. They just have not given up much in the passing game. They've got good players in the secondary, A.J. Terrell and Jesse Bates. They don't give up anything to tight ends or wide receivers. They give up a little bit to running backs, but that's usually a good thing if that's what you're giving up the most to is running backs. They also blitz all the time. Like, they lead the NFL with like 46.9% blitzes according to Next Gen Stats. There's only one other team that's over 35 this season. So it's going to be a test. Now, I will say this. The flip side of that is, for all of you who have wanted the Colts to be run heavy and only throw the ball when necessary, this might be the game for you. You might finally have your game, because they're not good against the run. They have not been good against the run. They've been pretty much just as consistently giving up 100-yard games as they have not given up 200-yard passing games. So this, just based on the way this matchup looks, this might be the game where you get to see Jonathan Taylor run it 25, 30 times. And I know some of you out there really, really, really desperately want that, and you don't think the Colts should ever pass in any circumstances ever. Wing T Colts is what some people want.
No, I mean, when you think about this weekend's game against the Steelers, I mean, they were doing really very little blitzing and still obviously bringing a good load of pressure that, of course, created those 5 turnovers that we saw, all in some way credited to Daniel Jones. I would not be surprised if they kind of took a little bit different tact. I don't know that you would say that they're acting in response to how that game went, but specifically when you saw what happened when the Steelers attacked the right way, and the Falcons, of course, will have that game film to be able to look at and analyze and try to figure out ways that they can replicate it. Shane Steichen always talks about how everything in this offense from his vision starts with the passing game. Maybe that is a little bit different this weekend. Maybe you try to get Jonathan Taylor rolling a little bit, and that perhaps opens up the pass game. I will be really interested to see how they attack that. Everything that we've heard from this Colts locker room, both immediately after the game, from the couple times that we've talked to Shane and the coordinators, and then players again today, and the couple moments that they were asked questions that weren't Sauce Gardner related, it does seem like they still remain really confident in who this team was the first 8 weeks of the season, and believe that Steelers loss can be, but a blip on the radar. But this, if you come out and struggle, if there are lots of turnovers, if they just kind of barely beat this Falcons team, although when it comes down to it, I think you would probably take any win that you can come across when you're having to play such a different type of game, traveling to Berlin and facing what is probably a sneaky good Falcons team. I think if you're the Colts, you really want to respond and kind of send a message. Even if Daniel Jones wouldn't think about it this way, I'm sure there are a lot of folks in the Colts organization that want him to have a good game. So there's not this, these questions that continue to linger about who the real Daniel Jones is, and if what we saw Sunday is a regression toward the mean instead of an anomaly type game, even if he had plenty of several games when he was with the Giants where things would kind of get out of control and get out of hand. So I will be very intrigued to see how this game goes, particularly for this offense. Once we get here to Sunday morning, I believe the game kicks off at 9:30 Eastern time.
Correct.
It's something like 3:30 or 4:30 for you.
Sounds right. Sounds right. I don't know. You just wait. Like, people always ask about like the time changing. Like, the best way to do it is you just wait for your phone to update, and then just go with that. That's the best way to do it. Instead of the hardest part is when I try to like call home and try to figure out like when people are awake. That's the hardest part. But like, yeah, in terms of local time in Germany, I think it's 6 hours. Maybe it's 5.
6 sounds right. I think, the one time I have gone to the UK, I know the UK was, I thought 5, and I thought pretty much everywhere else around there, France, Germany.
6 hours.
I think 6. So there we go. 6 hours. So some brunch time football action for us here on Sunday for those of us who will be watching from Indianapolis, what have you. Anything else you feel like is important to touch on in terms of this Colts-Falcons matchup as they look to have one more game here before they get into the bye week?
This might be a special teams game. Falcons are bad. I'm trying to remember like what I wrote in our preview stuff which I'm going to have to go change because it didn't include Sauce Gardner because I wrote it before that trade. But if I remember right, they're not good at kick coverage. They're not good at returns. They're on their third kicker. It's Zane Gonzalez, who's a journeyman. The Colts have generally been pretty good on special teams, with the exception of Josh Downs' punt returns. Although it might be down this week, so that's something to watch from the other side of things. But this might be a special teams game. The Falcons' special teams profiled is pretty bad, and that might be an opportunity for the Colts on Sunday.
Yeah, we learned today Anthony Gold, along with Samson Ebukam and Tyquan Lewis, all three did not practice today. There were a couple other Colts on the injury report that didn't practice, but I think those three are probably your notable ones. We'll have to monitor. Gold, of course, is your typical returner who Josh Downs filled in for, and then started off the half dozen turnovers with the muffed punt in the first quarter on Sunday against the Steelers. I am sure he has done a lot of work since then to rectify those errors he had, both in that play there of just not getting away from the ball if he wasn't going to catch it, as well as not catching the ball, the punt late that dropped down to I think somewhere around like the 12-yard line for a Colts team that was needing to score and score quickly, and maybe take a roll of the dice at a burst return that just did not happen. So we'll see if Josh Downs is still returning kicks. once we get to Sunday. I'm sure there will be more to learn on the injury report. Of course, the most important thing is whether Sauce Gardner will return and clear concussion protocol. Hopefully we'll have something to write about that come Thursday morning, and that news might have already come out by the time you listen to this podcast. Joel and I will also be coming after the game to break down what we see from Sauce Gardner in his debut, his first time in a Colts jersey on the playing field, and what happens in this Colts Falcons matchup, and kind of what things are looking like as Indianapolis heads toward its bye week in Week 11. A lot to break down, a lot to develop still over the next couple days before the Colts get onto the field in Berlin. Go to indystar.com for all of that news. There will be a lot more stories that both of us will be writing between now and then a lot to break down after the Colts Falcons game on Sunday. Thanks for joining us for this latest edition of the Colts Cover-2 Podcast. Please sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and follow on your favorite podcast platform, wherever you get your podcasts. And we will look forward to coming to you next time on Sunday night.